Marcus, the teller, froze, his eyes locked on the computer screen. Whispered conversations rippled across the lobby as customers glanced nervously at each other. The bank manager took a hesitant step forward. In the center of it all, a young woman, calm, composed, completely still. Marcus's voice cracked. "Ma'am, I think you should step into my office." Narrator, soft, measured. What they saw on that screen changed everything. But how did it come to this moment? Narrator, slightly louder. "Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos." It began 6 months earlier. Julia was just another face in a crowded city, working 2 jobs, a cashier by day at a small diner and a night shift at a convenience store to make ends meet. She wore worn-out sneakers, her fingers often trembling from fatigue, her back aching by the time she climbed into bed after midnight. She rarely had time for friends, her apartment was modest, and every paycheck carried the weight of unpaid bills. She kept a small photo tucked in her wallet, a picture of her younger brother, taken when they were kids laughing under summer sun. She promised him once, by the time he turned 18, she'd give him a chance at real opportunities. She believed in that promise. One day, after working a double shift and staring at one too many eviction notices sliding under her door, Julia received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end, calm, authoritative, offered her a deal. She could pay off all her debt, save her brother from a forced move to a foster home, if she did one small thing. All she had to do was walk into a local bank, withdraw a large sum, nothing more, nothing less, and hand it over to a courier. She hesitated. She asked why. The voice said it was just a temporary mistake, a loan covered by a business. They said they'd return the money within a week, with extra, once everything was settled. Fear and desperation warred inside her. She thought, maybe this is my only way out. She agreed. That night, she lay awake listening to the old radiator hiss in the silence of her apartment, imagining the look on her brother's face when they opened the eviction notice together. The smell of stale coffee cups from her double shifts lingered in the air, mixing with the cold draft seeping through the window. She hated that draft. It reminded her of how exposed they were. A week later, armed with trembling hands and a hastily filled withdrawal slip, she entered the bank. The lobby smelled of polished wood and faint coffee from the staff's break area. She avoided eye contact, kept her cap pulled low, and tried to look like any other tired customer. When she handed over the slip, the teller Marcus typed the request slowly. The numbers on screen made his eyebrows rise. He glanced up, and something in the way he looked at her made her heart pound. As the manager came forward and voices rippled through the lobby, Julia clenched her jaw. Her mind raced. This was supposed to be simple. They said nothing would go wrong. 2 months earlier, she had visited the same bank. A small deposit, nothing suspicious. Staff remembered her as a quiet, polite customer who always spoke in soft tones. She blended into routine, but this time the amount was huge, far more than her bank history would suggest. Marcus froze. The manager's face turned gray. Other customers began shifting in their seats, nervous energy filling the room. And then the moment, "Ma'am, I think you should step into my office." What they saw on that computer screen changed everything. 6 months after the initial phone call, weeks of sleepless nights, and a pile of debt that felt impossible to climb out of, Julia stood there, speechless, caught in a trap she never asked for. She stared at the floor, the quiet hum of the bank's AC filling the silence. She fought the urge to run. In that small, cold office, the manager's voice was soft but firm. "We're calling the police. You may have been contacted by someone pretending to be from a legal firm. We have your account history, and this withdrawal doesn't match your profile." Julia's throat closed. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her hands shook. She felt a wave of nausea. She thought, what about my brother? What about the eviction? Weeks later, while waiting at a local diner for her night shift, Julia sat staring at a half-empty coffee cup. The diner smelled of frying oil and stale sugar. She thought about her brother sleeping in their small apartment, hoping tomorrow would be better. She thought about the bright photograph tucked in her wallet, the promise she made, the promise she shattered. Then, a twist she never saw coming. The investigators discovered that the anonymous voice on the phone was part of a larger fraud ring. Thousands of people scammed out of life-changing savings. They also traced communications to a small group in a distant city. Julia, though terrified, agreed to testify. She understood. If she stayed silent, more people like her, people desperate, vulnerable, would suffer the same fate. Months later, standing in court with trembling fingers and her brother by her side, she listened as the fraud ring's leader was sentenced. She watched his face when the judge called out the verdict. It was a quiet kind of justice, but real. Her brother cried quietly, relief and guilt mixing in his eyes. She squeezed his hand, tears sliding down her cheeks. She felt the weight of months lifting. Today, Julia works at a small non-profit, helping people who've fallen victim to scams. She doesn't make much money, but she sleeps better. She sees her brother laugh again. She sometimes catches the smell of old coffee and remembers those nights of fear. But now, it doesn't haunt her. It reminds her of how close she came to losing everything, and how she fought her way back. If you were in Julia's shoes, what would you have done? If that phone call came to you while you were drowning in bills, would you walk into that lobby and trust those strangers? Tell me in the comments how you feel. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could happen to any of us. Stay safe, stay aware, and always trust your instincts. From the moment Ella Reed stepped into that bank, something about her presence made people turn their heads. She wore a faded jean jacket, the collar frayed from years of use, and held a weathered envelope pressed tightly to her chest. Her shoes were worn, the kind people glance at once and silently make assumptions about. She stood near the entrance for several seconds, whispering to herself, rehearsing the same line over and over. I just need to see my balance. Her voice trembled each time she tried to say it with confidence. Marcus, the teller who prided himself on reading people quickly, noticed her immediately and rolled his eyes. To him, she looked like someone who'd walk in asking to cash a check that wouldn't clear. Customers stepped aside subtly, creating space around her as if poverty was contagious. What none of them realized was that Ella had spent the last week gathering the courage just to step through those doors. Marcus finally motioned her forward, though the gesture carried the kind of impatience that makes a person shrink. Ms. Turner, the branch manager, stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching Ella with the same skeptical expression she reserved for people who she assumed had made poor life decisions. Behind them both, Mr. Hayes, the elderly security guard with kind eyes, observed quietly. He always paid attention to small details, the way someone held their breath, the slight shake in their hands, the absence of anger where you'd normally expect frustration. He noticed Ella's fingers tightening around the envelope every time someone looked at her too long. The envelope wasn't decorative or fancy. It was creased, soft at the edges, the kind that had been opened and closed 100 times, but guarded with unmistakable care. Something about the way she handled it made Mr. Hayes straighten up a little more, sensing that there was more to her presence than anyone else realized. When Ella approached the counter, she swallowed hard. Her voice could barely push out the words. I just need to see my balance, she said again, softer this time, as if she feared the request itself might offend someone. Marcus tapped on the keyboard without looking up, already assuming what he'd find. An overdrawn account, a few dollars here or there, maybe a government assistance deposit. Customers behind her sighed loudly, irritated by what they assumed would be a long, pointless transaction. But Ella didn't react. She'd grown used to misjudgment. She'd grown used to living in a world where people believed they could sum her up in a single glance. What kept her standing there was something deeper, something tied to the contents of that envelope, something she had avoided facing for months. And as the seconds ticked by, the narrator's truth hung heavy. The reason she finally walked into this bank was something nobody there could have imagined.